The prairie, at that hour before twilight, wore its silence like a hymn. Winds curled low over the grass, lifting the golden strands just enough to whisper among themselves. A wagon creaked down the worn trail, its wheels biting into the soft earth, its frame tired, like the woman who guided it. She sat tall, though the weight of something unseen curved her shoulders gently inward. Her name was Clara May. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt, a dry bloom of travel, of places passed but never entered. The wide brim of her hat shielded her from the sun, but not from the ache of memory. In the back of the wagon, her boy slept nestled among quilts stitched from another life, small, freckled, his hand clutching a wooden spoon like a sword. Clara's hands, calloused and patient, gripped the reins with care. She was not lost. She knew where the river bent, where the sky broke wider. But knowing the land did little to steady the tremor beneath her breast. There was something following her, not a beast, not a man. Just the long echo of a name she no longer said out loud. Jebediah had been her first fire. All charm and swagger in the beginning. He could dance, laugh, kiss like he meant it. But his words turned brittle come winter. Promises fell like dry leaves, each one crunching underfoot until the silence that followed became louder than any fight they'd had. When he left for Nevada in the spring, chasing the shimmer of silver, he didn't kiss her goodbye. He didn't even wake her. Clara didn't cry then. She had already done her mourning the year before, when she realized he loved the freedom of distance more than the warmth of her presence. After he disappeared, she stayed in that small Wyoming cabin for a year and a half, planting vegetables in soil that refused to soften. Her boy grew, and so did her silence. Then one morning she rose, braided her hair back, and hitched the wagon. Not toward family. There was none left. Not toward gold or promise. Just away. Some call that cowardice. But walking from pain is sometimes the bravest kind of love. The love one gives to themselves. A soft groan from the back pulled her from the hush of memory. The boy, Samuel, was stirring. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, his cheeks sun-pink and sleep-creased. "Ma," he murmured, voice still thick with dreams. She turned, offering a smile that barely curled. But it was real. "You're safe," she said, the same word she whispered every time he woke. "We're still moving." The trail narrowed as they passed a cluster of cottonwoods, their branches swaying in slow rhythm. Clara noted the hoofprints near the waterline, fresh and heavy, too many for one rider. Her fingers tensed slightly on the reins. She wasn't new to wariness. The frontier didn't offer safety, only distance. And even that could lie. Later, she stopped to gather dry grass and firewood, leaving Samuel to chase grasshoppers nearby. The wind tugged at her scarf as she stooped beside a creek, her reflection flickering in the current like a half-remembered version of herself, eyes shadowed, mouth too serious. She caught sight of movement across the bank. Just a flicker. A horse, perhaps, or the trick of light through trees. She rose slowly, eyes scanning. Nothing came. The woods stood still as prayer. That night, she cooked beans in a tin pot and shared cornbread she'd bartered for at the last trading post. An old man there named Elijah had taken her hand and said, "You carry yourself like a woman who's walked through flame and didn't scream." She had only nodded. There hadn't been screaming, only the quiet unraveling that comes after the last slammed door. As dusk melted into night, Samuel nestled against her side, thumb in his mouth, eyelids heavy. "Tell me a story," he said, barely above a whisper. She brushed back his hair. "Once," she began, voice low and warm, "there was a mother and her cub who crossed the wildlands. The world tried to scare them, but they had something stronger than fear." "What?" he asked, eyes already closing. "Each other," she said, and pressed a kiss to his brow. The fire snapped softly, sending sparks into the dark. Crickets sang their fragile lullaby, and the stars began to bloom overhead. She didn't sleep easily. She never did anymore. Instead, she watched the fire die down, fed it only when needed, and waited for the world to turn just enough to survive another day. Near midnight, the mule shifted uneasily. A low bray broke the silence. Clara sat up straight, eyes sweeping the horizon. The prairie didn't make noise unless it needed to. Her hand drifted to the rifle lying across the wagon bench. Then she saw them. Shadows against the ridge, not yet close, but not passing by either. 3 no, for riders, their outlines cut sharp against the moonlit grass. No lanterns. No open trail signs. Just men riding low and slow, like snakes in tall weeds. Clara did not move to wake Samuel. She only tucked the rifle closer, watched until the shadows slid out of view, and leaned back against the wagon frame, letting the night press around her like a blanket she didn't trust. Come morning, the prints were still fresh. She traced one with her fingertip, wide-hoofed, a horse carrying weight. The marks were deep. They had stopped here, watched her, then moved on. She didn't speak of it to Samuel. Not yet. Instead, she hitched the mule and moved faster than usual, eyes darting toward every rise of earth, every cluster of rock. Her breathing stayed shallow, her mouth a thin, unreadable line. They passed no one that day. The prairie had gone quiet again, but it was not the gentle quiet of the evening before. It was the quiet of something holding its breath. That night, she chose not to light a fire. Samuel didn't ask why. She laid awake long after he slept, the rifle across her lap, the wagon pulled near a low rise for cover. The wind tugged at the grass in cautious waves. The stars, unblinking, bore down on her like old judges. Somewhere far off, an owl cried. Then nothing. When sleep finally pulled at her, it came not as rest, but as resignation, the kind where the body folds inward and waits for whatever may come. And still, even in the midst of fear, she found herself murmuring a promise she didn't know she kept. I will not be undone, she whispered to the dark, to the grass, to the woman she once was. The prairie heard her. And far beyond her eyes, something else did too. A breath in the wind. A pack on the move. Something was coming. Not to take, but to remember. And so the night passed, neither safe nor broken. Just waiting. Just holding its breath. The morning after the wind changed, the prairie felt different. The sun still rose amber and gentle, but the air tasted like metal, dry and sharp on the tongue. Even the mule moved with caution, ears twitching, steps reluctant. Clara sensed it before she saw it. A weight pressing down on the day, as if the land itself was bracing for something it had endured before. Samuel was quiet too, picking at the remains of a cold biscuit, his eyes scanning the grass the way children do when they sense grown-up tension without words. He didn't ask to run or chase the wild quail that startled in the brush. He stayed close. Clara checked the wagon's axle once more. It had held so far. She'd mended it herself with spare wood, twine, and the soft mutterings of a woman trying not to cry. She tightened the leather straps, wiped her hands on her skirt, and took the reins. They moved slower than usual, not by choice. The land was flatter here, more open. No trees for cover. No rocks to press a wagon against. Just long grass, too quiet, and a silence that began to hum in her ears. Then, just past midday, it happened. It began with a sudden gust, unnatural in its force, scattering dust and grit into her eyes. She squinted, tugged her hat low, and felt the mule freeze beneath her hands. She followed the animal's stare and saw them. 3 riders. No, 4. They crested the hill like carrion birds, silent, without gesture or call. Their horses picked careful steps down the slope, hooves muffled by the dry grass. Clara's hand dropped instinctively to the rifle, but she didn't raise it. Not yet. The lead rider wore a bandana over his mouth, but his eyes smiled, not kindly. The kind of smile that played with fear. The second man was young, barely more than a boy, trying to look fierce and failing. The third was large and round, sweat glistening on his neck, shirt opened wide like pride itself. The fourth, quietest, rode slightly behind the others. She couldn't see his face, but he had a crow tattoo inked black on his neck, just beneath the ear. She'd seen that ink before. 2 nights ago, when the stars had gone still. Clara didn't move. The lead rider dismounted slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers like he'd just finished supper. Well now, he said, voice smooth as worn leather. Ain't this a fine surprise? Samuel moved to step down from the wagon, but Clara caught his arm and held him behind her. Whatever you're after, she said, voice steady but soft. Take it and go. He walked a circle around the mule, ran a hand along its flank, then looked back at her. You travelin' alone? He asked, though it wasn't a question. His eyes flicked past her shoulders, searching. Clara didn't answer. She didn't flinch. The round man climbed onto the wagon bed. She turned fast, too fast, raising the rifle, but the bandanaed leader stepped between. Easy now, he said. We ain't here to cause hurt. Behind him, his friend rifled through her things with fat, eager fingers. Clara's voice cracked like dry wood. Then step away. The leader's smile flickered. He took a step back, then gestured. Just lookin'. Lot of folks carry in extra these days. Trade post been light. We're hungry same as you. One of them found the tin of beans. Another the pouch of flour. Samuel clutched the wooden whistle Reed had carved long ago, one of the few things they hadn't bartered away. Then the quiet one, the one with the crow tattoo, reached for Clara's hand. Not in kindness. For the ring. A plain band, worn, nearly invisible against her rough hands. Still, he saw it. She pulled back, the rifle rising. He moved fast, grabbing her wrist, twisting. The rifle fell. A kick to her stomach folded her to the ground. Dust flew. Samuel cried out. Clara gasped but didn't scream. Instead, she clutched her boy close, curled her body around his small frame. The others laughed. Not full laughter. Just the kind that curdles in the throat, mean empty. Easy now, the leader said again, brushing off his vest like the moment hadn't happened. No need for this to go ugly. But it already had. They took what they wanted. Not everything. Just what they could carry fast. A blanket, the flour sack, a tin plate. The round one smashed the axle with a boot as he jumped down. Clara's mule brayed, rearing slightly. As they mounted again, the man with the crow tattoo spit near her boots. Where's that husband o' yours now? He muttered, sneering. Clara said nothing. She watched them ride away with the eyes of someone who was not praying for rescue, only remembering. After they disappeared over the hill, the wind returned. A slow, warm breeze, like a hand across the face of the wounded. Samuel's fingers clutched her dress. He was crying now, soft and hiccuping. Clara pressed her lips to his hair, held him with all that remained. She didn't check the damage right away. She just sat there, arms tight around her boy, until the sun shifted and shadows began to stretch long across the field. Eventually, she stood. The axle was cracked. The rear wheel listed. It would move again, but not far. Not until it was fixed. She made a fire low and hidden. No light tonight. She boiled water with dry sage and bathed her son's hands. Her own bruises bloomed slowly. One eye would swell by morning. Her lip had split. Still, she didn't cry. The sky deepened from gold to rose to gray. No stars yet. Just a single thin line of cloud stretched across the horizon. Samuel lay curled beneath the quilt, thumb in his mouth, already slipping into uneasy sleep. Clara sat nearby, her rifle beside her, broken axle behind her, and her breath steady, the way a storm steadies right before it breaks. She did not hear the footsteps at first. They were soft, padded. Not boots, not hooves. Pause. The mule snorted. Then she saw them, four-legged shapes moving just beyond the firelight. Not circling. Watching. Silent. Wolves. Her body tensed, not with fear, but readiness. She rose slowly, not making a sound. The rifle came up. Then she saw the figure behind them. A man tall, still, wrapped in leather and shadow. He did not speak. Just walked forward until the fire kissed his boots and lit the edge of his face. Clara stared, rifle held high, confusion flickering. He stepped fully into view. The wolves stayed behind him, seated now calm. He knelt beside the wagon, ran a hand over the mule's mane, checked the wheel. Still no words. Her hand dropped, slowly, carefully. His eyes lifted, met hers. They were the same eyes she remembered, not because of color or shape, but because they saw her without looking through her. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't scold or pity. He reached for the rifle. Gently, he took it from her hands, checked it for damage, then handed it back. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He turned to the fire, tossed in a few sticks, sat near it, still silent. The wolves lay down beside him like kin. Clara didn't speak either. Not yet. But she sat. Close. Just close enough. And in the hush of the prairie, with the sky still bruised from day's end, the woman who had lost everything leaned slightly toward the man who had never asked her to explain. The fire crackled softly between them, and something unspoken, something old and necessary, settled into the earth beneath them like roots. They would move again soon. There was still damage to mend, fear to bury. But for now, in the presence of a silence that held no judgment, only belonging, she was not alone. Morning broke not with brilliance, but with hush. A veil of cloud softened the light, casting the prairie in tones of pearl and ash. Dew clung to the grass in silent surrender, and the fire from the night before had long since collapsed into whispers of smoke. Clara stirred first, rising stiffly from where she'd slept near the wheel. Her body ached in too many places to name. She moved like a woman learning to walk again, every motion slow, deliberate. Samuel still slept beneath a quilt frayed at the edges, but warm enough to carry dreams. The man, Reed, was already up. He stood at the edge of the camp, one hand resting on the back of the mule, the other stroking the ruff of the wolf closest to him. The animal blinked slow and sure, its silver coat damp from morning mist. Neither man nor beast made a sound. Clara watched them for a moment, not with surprise, but with the kind of tired or reserved for things too strange to doubt. Reed hadn't said a word since he arrived. He hadn't needed to. She approached him carefully, still unsure where silence ended and intimacy began. "You track them," she said softly, the words barely audible. Reed nodded. She saw the edge of a burlap sack by his boots. He lifted it and held it out. Inside was her quilt, ripped but recovered, along with a few tin spoons, the leather pouch of flour, and Samuel's carved whistle. She reached for the bundle, fingers grazing his. "Thank you," she whispered. Reed met her eyes, and in that long, unblinking gaze, she read things not said. "I saw what they took. I knew it mattered. I brought back what could be carried." The wolves shifted behind him, rising as one. He glanced back at them, made a soft sound, almost breath, almost thought, and they dispersed into the grass without protest. Samuel stirred then, blinking up at the world, as though he expected nothing good and still hoped for it. When he saw Reed, he sat up straight, eyes wide, cautious. Clara knelt beside him. "It's all right. This is—" She paused, unsure what name to give. He was not her first love. He had not asked to be called husband. But he had stayed when no one else had. That counted for more than a ring. "This is Reed," she said finally. "He's a friend." Samuel studied him, then the space where the wolves had been. "Are they his?" he asked. "No," Clara answered. "They walk with him, that's all." Reed crouched and reached into the sack again. He pulled out a small wrapped bundle, dried meat, bread, and a sliver of hard cheese. He offered it to the boy. Samuel hesitated, then took it with two hands, murmuring, "Thank you." Reed only nodded. As the day warmed, they worked. Reed repaired the axle with the focus of someone who had built things with his hands before words were ever trusted. Clara watched the way he moved, clean, methodical, never wasting emotion. She joined him after settling Samuel near the fire with a book. "You always know how to fix things," she said. Reed looked up, his mouth twitching into the barest suggestion of a smile. He tapped the wood with his knuckle. Then he spoke, the first word since his arrival. "Some things." His voice was low, rasped from disuse, like it had come up through stone. But it held no anger, no warning, just quiet truth. Clara's breath caught, not from the sound of him, but from the weight of hearing a man who didn't speak unless he meant it. They worked in tandem. She passed tools. He tested the wheel. The mule stood patiently, as if it too understood something important was being mended. By noon, the wagon was upright again. Not perfect, but whole enough to move. They didn't speak of the men who had come before. Not yet. The prairie had ways of telling what needed saying and what could stay buried beneath the grass. Instead, Clara set out water to boil and fetched her sewing kit. She stitched the torn quilt, the one Reed had retrieved, while Samuel napped again in the shade of the wagon. Reed sat nearby, sharpening a blade with slow, even strokes. "Do you remember the first time we met?" she asked, voice low. He didn't look up, just nodded once. "I was working that post station by the river. You came in with furs to trade. You barely said a word then either." "You were reading," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "You brought me dried pears that time. Left them by the window." Reed didn't reply, but she saw the faintest softening in his eyes. A memory shared without needing to be spoken aloud. She paused in her stitching. "When I asked you to stay, I didn't mean for you to stay forever. I didn't expect that." "You didn't ask," he said. "You just left the door open." Clara looked down at her hands. "And then one day, you weren't just someone passing through." Reed set the blade aside. Sometimes staying is louder than speaking. The wind picked up then, rippling through the grass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them had weight, but no sharp edges. It held them gently. Samuel stirred again, stretching his arms overhead. "Ma, I'm hungry." "We'll eat soon," she said. "Supper's not far off." Reed stood and disappeared briefly behind her eyes. When he returned, he carried 3 rabbits, already cleaned, their fur left in neat piles along the trail. Clara blinked. "You caught those just now?" He shrugged. "They were close enough." That night they ate well. Rabbit stew, boiled with sage and wild onion. Samuel laughed, a real laugh, when Reed handed him a sharpened stick and showed him how to roast a piece over the coals. Clara didn't realize how much she missed that sound until it came back. Later, after the fire had settled into embers, she sat alone near the wagon while Reed checked the horizon one last time. When he returned, she didn't move. Just asked, "Will you keep going with us?" Reed stood for a long moment before he answered, "If you want me to." She looked up at him, shadows dancing across his face. "I don't want protection. I want partnership. I want someone who sees me and still stays." Reed knelt beside her, close enough that she could hear the sound of his breathing. "I never saw you as something broken," he said. "I saw you standing. That was enough." The fire cracked softly, as if nodding in agreement. She reached out and took his hand. Not a lover's touch. Not yet. But something rooted and certain. Samuel called out from under the quilt. "Ma, you there?" "I'm here, love," she called back. Reed did not let go. Neither did she. And in that moment, surrounded by the hush of healing, Clara realized that quiet things carried more weight than thunder. Tomorrow would bring movement, choices, maybe danger. But tonight there was warmth, a circle of light, and a man who did not try to fix her, only to walk beside her. And for the first time in many moons, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was not walking toward more pain. She was walking home. The morning rode in on wind. Not soft, not whispering like the days before. It came with purpose, gathering dust and voices of things yet to happen. Clara felt it in her teeth, in the stiffness of her fingers as she laced Samuel's boots, in the way the mule refused to drink until the sun rose fully above the distant ridge. They were only 2 days from the river crossing now. Beyond that, a small town waited, no more than 12 buildings nestled by cottonwoods. A place with walls and roofs, and people who didn't vanish into dusk. Clara had heard there was a schoolhouse there, a woman who sold ink and paper, and a man who carved rocking chairs for those who dared settle. It wasn't promise, but it was enough. She didn't speak much that morning. Neither did Reed. But there was a tension between them, not anger, not fear. A bracing, like trees before a storm. Reed kept his hand near his belt, and the wolves flanked them, without command, ears flicking at every shift in the grass. Samuel picked up on it too. He didn't ask to wander ahead or sing songs to the mule like he had the day before. He rode in the wagon, legs crossed, clutching the carved whistle in his palm. His eyes stayed on Reed more than usual, as if trying to understand the measure of the man walking beside them. By late morning, they reached a dry rise overlooking a stretch of broken plain. The trail curved ahead, narrowed between 2 stands of rock. It was a good place to wait, a better place to trap. Reed slowed, then stopped altogether. Clara drew up beside him, her voice a hush. "You feel it too?" He nodded once, not taking his eyes from the path below. From the height, she saw them. 3 riders this time. Same horses. Same lean anger etched into every movement. And there, at the edge of the group, the man with the crow tattoo. She didn't flinch, didn't curse, just looked at Reed and said, "They followed us." Reed knelt in the dust, pressing his hand to the earth. When he stood, he whistled once, sharp, clean, and the wolves gathered around him like smoke drawn to a flame. Clara turned to Samuel, who had climbed down from the wagon, eyes wide but quiet. "You stay low," she told him. "Stay here until I call, no matter what." He nodded. No argument, no fear in his voice, just understanding. She wrapped a blanket around him, tucked him beside the wagon's wheel, and kissed his hair. The riders came slowly, one pulling ahead with false ease, reins loose, hand resting near the pistol at his side. "Well now," he called, his voice too loud for the hush of the plain. "I figured you had someone trailing us. Didn't expect it to be the silent kind." Reed said nothing. He stood like stone, the wolves fanned out beside him, unmoving. The man smirked. "Thought maybe we'd take back what you borrowed. You know, return things to proper order." Clara stepped forward. Her rifle hung at her side, not raised, not hidden. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the air like a blade. "You already took what wasn't yours." The man chuckled, gesturing to his companions. "You hear that? She's found her voice." He dismounted, his boots hitting the earth with a thud. The other 2 stayed in their saddles, fingers twitching near holsters. Clara could feel the weight of Reed's silence behind her. Not cold, not retreating, just coiled, measured. The outlaw stepped closer, too close. "You think this man and his pets are going to scare us?" he asked, voice low now. "Think that's enough to stop what's coming?" Clara didn't answer. She didn't have to. Reed moved, not fast, not violent, just forward. His shadow stretched long in the light. The wolves followed, each step mirrored with eerie calm. The man with the crow tattoo raised his pistol. That was his mistake. Reed gave one sharp, guttural sound. Not a shout, just a command. The wolves broke like a wave, silent, precise. One took the legs of the horse beneath the rider on the left. The beast screamed, buckling, throwing the man sideways into rock. Another leapt at the boy-faced outlaw, snarling, teeth flashing white in sunlight. The boy fired once, wild, missing sky and ground alike, before vanishing beneath fur and dust. The leader turned, pistol drawn, aiming square at Reed. But Clara had already raised her rifle. Her shot was clean. A warning. It struck the earth a foot from his boot. He froze. "Try again," she said, her voice low and steady. Reed stepped past her, past the gun smoke, toward the man who now stood with nothing but rage left. "You think you're better than us?" the outlaw growled. Reed said nothing, just reached forward and gripped the man by his coat, pulled him down to meet his eyes. The wind stilled. Something passed between them, something heavy and quiet and final. Reed let go. The man staggered back, breath coming fast, fingers trembling. He turned and ran. Clara watched him vanish over the hill, the wolves standing in stillness, not chasing, not needing to. Samuel emerged slowly from the wagon, eyes wide, whistle clenched tight. Clara dropped to one knee and pulled him close. She felt the hitch in his chest, the held-back sob, the fragile trembling of a boy trying to be brave. "You did good," she whispered. "You did just right." Reed crouched near the wolves, brushing a hand through their fur, murmuring something too soft to catch. Clara looked at the scattered dust, the empty saddles, the silence left behind. And then the quiet came. Not the kind born of fear. The kind born of something ending, something being released. A weight lifted. They didn't speak for a long time. They packed slowly, carefully. The wolves loped ahead, clearing the path as they always had. That night, camped near the river, Reed lit a fire with deliberate gentleness. Clara sat beside him, shoulders brushing. Samuel sat on the other side, eating bread and humming to himself, soft and content. Reed finally spoke. You didn't miss. Clara looked at him, brow lifting. Would have been cleaner if I had. He nodded, but not truer. She smiled, tired but whole. You always did believe truth was better than blood. Reed didn't answer, but his hand found hers again, and this time she laced their fingers together. Later, long after Samuel had fallen asleep, she asked him what he'd said to the man with the crow. Reed stared into the fire. Told him I remembered what he did. Told him the wolves would, too. Clara nodded slowly. He believed you. They always do, Reed said. The stars came out slow, like they were shy that night. Clara tilted her head back, watching them unfold. You think they'll come back? She asked. Reed's voice was quiet. No. They won't forget. And neither would she. In the flicker of firelight, wrapped in the scent of ash and cedar, Clara understood something deeper than fear, deeper than justice. This wasn't about revenge. It was about being seen, being defended not because she was broken, but because she mattered, because someone had chosen to stay. The wind shifted again, gentler now, brushing strands of hair from her face. Reed looked at her, really looked. And in that stillness, she said the one thing she'd never dared before. Come morning, let's not keep going just to leave things behind. Reed's voice was almost a breath. Then let's go to build something instead. The wolves circled once, then lay down near the boy. The fire whispered low, and somewhere deep in the dark, the prairie exhaled. The past would always walk beside them, but now so would love. The kind that remembers. The kind that stays. The wind was the only thing that answered Elias Dunn anymore. It brushed over the hills in long, mournful sighs, like it too had forgotten how to hope. His boots left no eager prints in the snow that morning, just the tired drag of a man who'd grown used to wait, on his back, in his bones, and somewhere deeper still. The barn stood a little crooked, same as him, but it hadn't fallen yet. That counted for something. Elias pushed the door open slow, not to spare the hinges, but because he moved like someone who no longer expected surprises. The frost on the beams glittered faintly in the early light, a soft and brittle beauty that didn't ask to be noticed. He didn't notice it. He set down his sack of feed, tugged his gloves tighter, and crossed to the mule stall. The leather bridle had split again. He crouched and began the careful work of mending it, fingers stiff, the silence around him thick as wool. It was the kind of quiet he wore like a second skin, peaceful maybe, but never warm. A rustle broke it. Not the kind an animal makes. Not a mouse or bird. This was slower, human, hesitant. Elias stilled, the bridle hanging like a forgotten sentence from his hand. He rose to his feet with caution, not fear, and turned toward the hayloft. There, curled into herself under a threadbare wool blanket, lay a woman. For a moment, nothing moved. Not him, not her, not even the air. Time hung like breath caught in a cold throat. She was asleep, though her body didn't look like it had been rested in weeks. Her clothes were dusted with road dirt, her boots cracked and nearly falling apart. One hand clutched her belly, a belly round with child, and Elias felt something jolt inside him. An ache so sudden and sharp it nearly made him speak aloud. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her face was pinched by winter's grip, but there was something gentle there still, like the last flower surviving in a snowed-over field. Her hair was the color of old honey, tangled and dull, but clean. Someone once had loved her. Maybe still did. But they weren't here now. Elias stepped back without a sound and sat on the nearest bale of hay, watching her as if from a distance. He couldn't cross even if he tried. The barn smelled of cedar shavings, cold air, and something older, loneliness maybe. He didn't know what she was doing here, or why. But the ache in her posture told him everything that mattered. He thought about waking her, about demanding an explanation. It was his barn, after all. His hay, his blankets, she'd taken without permission. But the thought vanished as quickly as it came. If she was sleeping here, she had nowhere else to go. And he, God help him, knew what that felt like. Instead, he rose and moved quietly to the small stove in the corner. He kept it there for emergencies, and this felt like one. The fire was slow to catch, but he coaxed it to life, added water to a kettle, and set a tin cup beside it. When the woman stirred at last, Hours had passed, and the light through the slats had turned gold. She didn't startle. That surprised him. She simply blinked, sat up slow, and gathered the blanket tighter around her belly. Her eyes swept the barn, then landed on him. Wide, wary, green as pine boughs under snow. He nodded once. Not a greeting. Not really. Just something to say, "I see you." Her voice was hoarse when it came. Didn't mean to trespass. He said nothing. Just poured her the coffee when the kettle began to whistle, and handed it over without meeting her gaze. She took it with both hands like it was something sacred. She drank slow. Let the heat wake her, maybe. After a while, she said her name. Annalise. No last name. No explanation. Just that. He told her his, Elias Dunn, and returned to the bridle, hands working though his mind did not. She watched him quiet. He could feel it, her eyes like touch. But she didn't ask questions. Didn't fill the space with talk. He liked that about her instantly. The wind moaned outside again, low and bitter. Annalise's face tilted toward it like she could understand its language. He wondered if she'd spoken to it too, once. They didn't speak much that day. She slept again. He fixed the hinge on the stall door, brought her a heel of bread and a bit of butter wrapped in wax cloth. She took it with a nod. No thanks. It wasn't rudeness, just weariness too deep for manners. That night, as he locked the barn and made his way back to the cabin, Elias found he was thinking not about how she got there, but what she had lost to end up in a place like this. A barn in the dead of winter. A stranger's kindness, her only shelter. She didn't ask for it. That, more than anything, made him want to give it. The next morning, she was still there. Sitting up this time, eyes open and clearer. Her coat hung open, revealing the full curve of her belly. She noticed his gaze, but didn't cover it. There was no shame in her, just tired acceptance. She spoke before he could. "The man I came for. He took one look and told me to get back on the train. Said he ordered a wife, not a burden." Her lips barely moved. Her voice was like wind over gravel, thin, worn. But she held herself upright, spine straight, hands firm around her belly. Defiant in the softest way. Elias said nothing. He didn't know the right words. He never had, really. His father used to say he spoke more to horses than humans. Elias reckoned the horses probably liked him better anyway. He handed her a small tin of stew. She ate slowly, savoring each bite like someone who didn't know when the next would come. When she finished, she said something that stayed with him for the rest of his life. "Didn't think anyone would let me rest. Not without asking what I was worth." He met her eyes then, really met them. Saw in them the kind of sorrow that didn't scream, didn't beg, just sat in silence, waiting for someone to sit beside it. "You can rest here," he said. He didn't say for how long. That night, he didn't sleep either. He lay in his cabin, the fire low, eyes open to the rafters. The wind howled again, but softer this time, as if it too was watching. He saw her in his mind's eye, curled in his barn with the child of another man inside her, and felt something in his chest begin to loosen. Not pity, not desire, something else. Something like recognition. She had arrived like snow in spring, unexpected, unwanted by some, but quietly beautiful in her persistence. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing. He didn't want her to leave, and that would change everything. The storm came in soft, like a secret. It touched the prairie with light fingers at first, cool mist rising from the earth, frost gathering in the corners of windows like forgotten lace. The sky were the color of old pewter, and the wind began to hum low, like a hymn only the desperate knew by heart. Annalise sat in the loft, wrapped in the same wool blanket that had hidden her the first night. The barn was warmer now. Elias had lit the stove again, and the scent of cedar smoke mixed with hay and horses and silence. She didn't speak. He didn't ask her to. They moved around one another the way weather moves around mountains, slow, inevitable, and without rush. She watched him often, though never with boldness. There was something about the way he worked, with quiet purpose and no need for praise, that made her chest ache. He fixed what he could, left the rest in God's hands. She had learned to do the same. That morning, He brought her a cup of tea and a coat. It was his mother's, he said. Old but warm. He didn't say anything about how thin her shoulders looked under the blanket or how she winced when she moved too fast. She didn't thank him, but she did put it on, and he counted that as something. Later, while he hauled water from the well, Annalise found the letters tucked in a wooden crate by the stove. Dozens, maybe more. All sealed. None sent. She didn't open them, though her fingers lingered on one that had no name written on the front. The handwriting was blocky and careful, like someone who didn't write often, but wanted to get it right. When Elias came back in, snow beginning to crown his shoulders, she didn't mention the letters. Just asked if she could help with the chores. He hesitated, then handed her a worn rag to polish the bridle leather. Not out of obligation, just so her hands wouldn't be idle, maybe. Idle hands let the past speak too loudly. As they worked side by side, the silence began to take on shape. Not heavy, not empty, just full of things neither of them had said yet. Outside, the wind picked up. The first flakes of snow began to fall with purpose. She broke the quiet first. His name was Clayton. Clayton Hargrove. Elias didn't stop polishing, though his jaw set a little. She kept her eyes on the leather. He answered my letter. Promised a roof, a home. Said he didn't mind that I wasn't untouched. I told him the truth. Wrote it plain as I could. What happened, who the father was. But I suppose some men read only what they want to believe. She set the rag down, fingers curling into her skirt. When I got off the train, he looked right through me. Said I was bigger than he expected. Said I tricked him. Then he walked away. Left me on the platform with nothing but cold and shame. Elias's voice came low, almost like he was talking to the horse, not her. He was a coward. Annalise blinked. The words weren't angry. They were something quieter, a kind of sorrow or maybe understanding. Cowards leave when things stop looking how they imagined. She didn't answer right away. Her throat was tight. The barn creaked as the storm pushed harder against its walls. My pa died when I was 15, she said. Ma followed the next year. Fever. After that, I bounced between distant cousins and pity homes. Folks wanted help, not girls with soft eyes and too many questions. So I learned to be quiet. Learned to keep moving. The baby's father? Gone, she whispered. A kind boy. Poor. Farmhand. We made a mistake one night. I thought maybe love would come after, but he died before spring came. I never even told him. She folded her hands over her belly. It rose and fell slowly under the coat. You ever lose someone, Elias? He paused, then nodded. My younger brother. Last March. Fever took him too. He used to talk enough for both of us. After he passed, the place got louder somehow. Like grief echoed more than laughter ever did. The barn settled into quiet again. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the air warmed, not from the stove alone, but from something else. A closeness unspoken, but growing. She looked at him. Did you write those letters? He didn't ask how she knew. Tried, he said. Every winter, I tell myself I'll send one come spring. Mail-order bride, they call it. Sounds like buying shoes. I never could stomach the thought of picking a woman out of a catalog. But I was lonely and tired. And, I don't know. I wanted someone who'd choose to stay. Annalise's eyes softened. You're kind, Elias. But lonely people don't always choose wisely. I didn't. Maybe, he said. But you survived it. That says more than most. She touched the edge of the blanket with careful fingers. When he left me, I felt something crack inside. Like I wasn't a woman anymore. Just a body too full of need. I thought I'd die out there. I really did. You didn't, he said. She looked at him, then really looked. His face was plain, strong. Not handsome in a showy way, but dependable. The kind of man whose silence meant something. Why didn't you wake me that first morning? You were sleeping, he said simply. Thought you might need it more than I did. She smiled. It was faint but real. The kind of smile that hadn't touched her lips in too long. That night, he made stew. Let her sit by the stove in the cabin. He didn't hover, didn't stare. Just sat across from her with his hands curled around a tin mug and eyes steady on the fire. When she coughed, he handed her a handkerchief. When she winced, he asked if she needed a better pillow. She declined. She wasn't used to softness. Didn't trust it yet. Still, she didn't want to leave. The storm howled louder, but inside the little cabin, there was quiet. He glanced at her once, and something passed between them. Something wordless, warm, and fragile as the steam rising between their cups. Outside, the world had turned white. Inside, something had begun to grow. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the beginning of trust. And sometimes that was even rarer. The storm did not let up. It thickened like grief, slow and smothering, until the world outside the barn vanished in white. Time softened with it. Hours blurred at the edges, marked only by the creak of wood, the hiss of a stove, and the faint, steady rhythm of two people learning how not to flinch in each other's presence. Elias mended what he could. He repaired the gate latch, boiled coffee twice, shoveled a path between cabin and barn that the snow filled in before evening. But mostly he watched. Not openly, not intrusively, just enough to remember the sound of her breathing and the quiet way she endured each day. Annalise moved differently now. Not fearfully, but with that careful grace only women who've had to earn their safety know. She took to folding things, blankets, dish towels, the edges of thought, and her hands were always busy. Once she offered to sew the rip in his coat. He gave it over without words and watched her fingers work, quick and neat, as though mending a stranger's burden was as ordinary as buttoning a cuff. He didn't ask questions. She didn't tell stories. But something passed between them in the way they shared silence. It was not absence, it was communion. A truce without terms. That night, the wind screamed. Not sang, not whispered, screamed. It clawed at the roof, like a thing desperate to be let in. Elias stood by the stove, feeding it slivers of wood, when he heard her cough. A short, sharp sound that made him move. He found her sitting upright in the loft, arms wrapped around her belly, face pale. Not from fever, from memory. He climbed the ladder, each step deliberate, and crouched beside her. Is it pain? She shook her head, but didn't speak. Not at first. He sat with her, back pressed against a beam, knees drawn up like a boy. The storm growled outside. In the stillness between gusts, she said, I've never felt safe with a man. Not really. Elias said nothing. Clayton wasn't the first to turn away. Just the last. Before him, there was a teacher who said I had a poet's soul and hands made for comfort. He married someone else when her dowry came through. And before him was hunger. The kind that makes you take things that feel like love just because they're warm for a little while. She looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly. And now this child. I don't know how to bring something into the world when I don't trust it yet. Elias let the words sit. Let them settle around them like snow that wouldn't melt. Then he said, soft as ash, You're not alone anymore. She turned her head. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her gaze was clear. I don't want pity. You won't get it from me. A long silence. Then, why are you here, Elias? He considered that for a while. Because I had a brother once who was better than me in every way. He could talk the bark off trees. Made folks laugh even when the well ran dry. When he died, I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I didn't know how to fall apart when no one was watching. He paused. Now the land's too quiet. The work too long. I thought if someone came, maybe the silence would shrink. She watched him. Not like she was trying to measure him, just like she saw him. Whole and simple. And not wanting to turn away. Elias leaned forward then, elbows on his knees. I don't need a wife to do my washing or warm my bed. I need someone who knows how to stay even when the storms come. Her breath hitched. That's asking a lot of a woman who was told she was too much. Maybe. But I don't see too much. I see someone still standing. She looked away, tears not falling but gathering, like they were waiting for permission. He shifted, reaching into his coat pocket. Drew out the Bible his mother had given him when he turned 20. The leather cracked, the pages thin as moth wings. He held it in both hands like something alive. Storm still strong. Won't be clearing by dawn. No sense sending you back into it. She said nothing. He opened the book to the family page. Blank. No names written there, but his own. You don't owe me anything. You can stay here as long as you need, and I'll ask nothing in return. She looked at him, mouth parted, unsure. But, he continued, if you wanted a name for you and that child, if you wanted to write it down here before the sun comes up, I'd stand with you. Not for show. Not for rescue. Just because I believe you deserve something that can't be taken back. Annalise stared at the Bible. Her lip quivered. No preacher. No papers. Just the fire and our names. That's enough for me, he said. Her fingers moved to her belly. Then to the page. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only nodded once, and it was the most powerful thing he'd ever seen. He handed her the pencil. She paused before writing. What's your mother's name? Susanna. Then maybe the child will carry that too. He didn't answer. Couldn't. She wrote her name first, Annalise Ruth. Then she passed the pencil to him. He wrote beside her, slow and sure. Elias Matthew Dunn. The fire crackled below. The storm raged outside. But inside the barn, something holy had bloomed. She leaned into his shoulder when she finished. He didn't move, didn't breathe too loud. Just let her rest there, safe and chosen. And before the light crept in, before the frost began to melt from the rafters, he asked her name again, not because he'd forgotten, but because he wanted to hear her say it with the weight of belonging. She said it, soft but steady. Annalise Dunn. And the storm, for the first time in 3 days, began to quiet. The thaw came slow, like forgiveness. First in the sound of water trickling beneath snowbanks, then in the soft give of earth beneath Elias's boots. The storm had left the world hushed and pale, but something had shifted beneath it all, something alive again. The wind no longer carried warning. Now it carried word. Annalise moved through the days like she belonged to them. She swept the cabin floor in slow, deliberate arcs, pausing often to rest a hand on her belly. She boiled herbs Elias hadn't thought useful, hung bundles of dried mint and lavender near the hearth, taught the mule not to shy when touched. She never asked for anything. Still, Elias brought her little things without comment. A better comb, a shawl he found buried in a trunk, a book with faded scripture and soft-pressed petals inside. They did not speak often of the night they wrote their names in the Bible. There had been no preacher, no neighbors as witness. But it sat on the table now, open to the page where their handwriting met. A quiet vow, an honest one. Then the first letter arrived, brought by May Stover's boy, who ran messages between homesteads when the road cleared. He stood awkward on the porch, clutching a folded note in mittened hands. "It's from Miss May," he muttered. "She says to bring you sassafras and soap root if you need it. Also says she's heard stories. Said to tell you she don't judge what grows in a barn if it grows good." Elias thanked him with a nod and a biscuit. When the boy left, Elias handed the note to Annalise. She opened it slow, reading each line twice. "She says she remembers me," she whispered. "From the station." Elias watched her face, saw the color rise in her cheeks. Not from shame, hope. She offered to send cloth for the baby. Says she can't see worth a damn anymore, but can still thread a needle by feel. Over the next days, more letters came. One from a preacher's wife who remembered Annalise's voice from church once, called it the kind of voice that sings even when it speaks. Another from a widow who'd lost 3 children before the war, and said she understood what it meant to walk with sorrow as your only companion. Most didn't ask questions. Most didn't offer judgment. They offered bread recipes, scraps of wool, warnings about the doctor in town who overcharged. Elias watched Annalise read each one with the same quiet awe a starving girl might reserve for a table laid with food. Her hands trembled less after that. But the kindness of women couldn't silence the men. It was a Tuesday when Elias took the wagon to town for feed and flour. Annalise stayed behind, swollen with child and warm in the quilt May had sent. She told him to be quick and not let the mule cheat him at the way station. He left with the sound of her laughter tucked beneath his ribs. Town was half mud, half rumor. At the mercantile, The shopkeeper's wife handed him a sack of sugar with a look that lingered too long. "You're sheltering a woman, I hear," she said, voice dipped in syrup and spite. Elias didn't answer. "I suppose every man's entitled to his mistakes," she added, folding brown paper around tins with slow disdain. He paid and left without a word. Outside, the street was slush, horses pawing impatiently. That's when he saw him, Clayton Hargrove. Leaner than memory, dressed sharp, eyes like frostbite. He stood near the post office, laughing with the mayor's son, until his gaze found Elias. The laughter stopped. Clayton crossed the muddy street like a man rehearsing every step. His boots splashed up filth, but his smile never faltered. "Didn't expect to see you playing house, done," he said. "Least of all with that one." Elias adjusted the sack on his shoulder. "Best keep walking." "Or what?" Clayton sneered. "You'll hit me with a bag of flour?" Behind him, townsfolk watched. Some leaned out from porches. Others pretended to inspect apples and rifles. The whole street seemed to lean forward, waiting. Clayton stepped closer, close enough to smell the drink on his breath. "She's carrying another man's shame. Don't matter if you dress it in wool and scripture. Still ain't yours." Elias didn't lift a fist. Didn't need to. "She's mine now," he said. "And if you knew the first thing about what that means, you'd keep her name out of your mouth." Clayton laughed, a thin, sour sound. "That ain't how the world works, Dunn." "Then let the world burn," Elias said, and turned away. He came home with his jaw tight, hands raw from a cold. Annalise met him at the door, helped him carry in the supplies without asking what had happened. She knew. She could always tell by the way he moved. Later, while she shelled beans by lamplight, he spoke. He was in town. Said some things. I didn't answer much. She didn't stop shelling. "He say my name?" He nodded. She smiled faintly. "Good. Let it sit on his tongue like a stone." In the following days, the letters came slower. Some kind. Some curious. A few sharp-edged, folded crisp like judgments. One called her unholy. Another said the baby would be born in confusion. Annalise read them all, burned only the ones that refused to spell her name right. Elias built her a writing desk from old barnwood, placed it near the window. She began to write letters back. To May, to the preacher's wife, to a girl named Ellie who said she'd also been promised, then left. Annalise's handwriting grew steadier with each reply. She no longer folded herself small. She walked the property in a shawl, talked to the baby as she fed the chickens, named the tallest pine on the hill after her father, braided her hair in the mornings, humming. One evening, as they sat on the porch, she said, "I want the child to carry your name not because I need it, but because you never made me earn it." Elias looked at her, the woman who had arrived in his barn like a question, and turned herself into an answer. He said, "You were never a debt to repay. Just a life I didn't know I was waiting for." She reached for his hand, resting it over her belly. "Then let her know what kindness feels like from the very start." The sun bled out behind the hills, casting the prairie in gold and lavender. A bird sang somewhere, its voice sharp against the hush. They didn't speak again for a while. They didn't need to. The world could keep sending its letters, its warnings, its cruel little verdicts. But the house had grown full of light, of warmth, of names no longer hidden. And Annalise, no longer someone left behind, had begun to bloom. The fire started just after sundown. The sky still held a smear of color, dusky orange and bruised plum, when Elias smelled it. Not the clean smoke of a hearth or the tang of pipe tobacco, but something harsher. Something wrong. Acrid and fast. He dropped the feed bucket and turned toward the barn. The roof glowed, a red, trembling light pulsed from beneath the eaves like the breath of something alive and furious. Smoke poured through the slats. Sparks cracked and leapt skyward, carried by the wind like startled birds. "Annalise," he called, already running. But she was at the door, eyes wide, shawl wrapped tight around her belly. Behind her, the lamp cast a long shadow, stretching her figure until she looked twice her size. Half woman, half storm survivor. "It's the barn," she said, her voice too calm. "I know." They moved fast, like they trained for it. Elias grabbed the pail and ran for the well. She brought wet burlap, wrapping her face, coughing as the wind shifted. The fire was climbing now, licking up the dry timbers with greedy tongues. Inside the barn were the mule, the chickens, the hay she gathered. But none of that was what made Elias curse under his breath. There near the door, half buried under spare tarps and crates, was the wool blanket. Her blanket. The one she'd slept in that first night, half frozen and too proud to ask for anything. He ran toward it like a man chasing something irreplaceable. Smoke blinded him. His lungs seized, barked hard against his ribs, but he didn't stop. Flames hissed and leaned in, as if they knew what he wanted and meant to keep it from him. Still, he reached the crate, kicked it aside, and yanked the blanket free. It was singed at the edges, but whole. He stumbled back just as a beam above gave way with a scream. Annalise's cry pierced through the fire's roar. She was near the barn door now, face pale beneath ash and fear, hands pressed to her belly as if holding the child steady. He staggered toward her, blanket clutched to his chest, smoke pouring from his clothes. She met him halfway, took his arm, dragged him to rest. They collapsed together near the water trough. She was shaking. He was coughing. Around them, the barn groaned one final time and collapsed inward in a storm of embers. They sat in the dirt and watched it burn. Not with horror, not with helplessness, just with the quiet knowing of people who had already survived worse. I should have known, Elias rasped at last. He wouldn't let us be. Annalise didn't ask who. She knew. Clayton. She'd seen him weeks ago, loitering near the blacksmith, face shaded beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He hadn't approached her then, just watched. But his stare had the chill of a man who couldn't stand being replaced. She should have told Elias. She hadn't wanted to give Clayton space in their lives again. I'll go to the sheriff, Elias said, still catching his breath. We'll press charges. Witnesses saw him near town. No, Annalise said softly. He looked at her. I want it to end here. Not with the law. Not with another man fighting another man. Let the barn burn. Let it be the last thing he takes. Elias held the blanket tighter. He doesn't get to decide what's lost. No, she said. We do. They rebuilt slowly. Neighbors came, some with buckets, others with nails and planks. May sent more letters. The preacher's wife brought stew and 3 pairs of infant socks knitted by hand. The mule survived. The chickens scattered but returned. Life, persistent and unpolished, resumed. But something in Elias had changed. He no longer moved with caution. He stood straighter when folks passed. He spoke Annalise's name out loud, without shame, and when someone whispered behind him at church, he turned and met their gaze until they looked away. The sheriff came once. Said Clayton had been found passed out drunk near the river, boots wet, hair singed. Claimed he'd fallen asleep smoking. The sheriff didn't press. Elias didn't push. Some truths didn't need carving. They just sat in the open, plain as sky. A week later, the baby came. It was a rough birth. Long Annalise's cries twisted through the cabin like wind before a twister. Elias held her hand, wiped her brow, whispered prayers he hadn't spoken since his brother died. When the child arrived, silent and blue, Elias felt his heart freeze. But then a wail, strong and high and furious. A girl. He fell to his knees beside the bed and wept. Annalise, pale and spent, smiled at him with cracked lips. She's got your eyes, she said. She ain't of my blood. She's yours, Annalise whispered, because you stayed. They named her Susanna, and the first thing Elias wrapped her in was the old wool blanket, still smelling faintly of smoke, of winter, of survival. Years passed. The land healed. The barn was rebuilt, stronger this time, and with more windows. Annalise planted lavender near the porch. Susanna grew into a fierce little thing who demanded stories every night and stomped through puddles like she owned the sky. One evening, Elias sat alone on the steps while the sun bled gold across the prairie. He held the old Bible on his lap, the page still bearing 2 names written in different hands. Wind swept over the hills, soft and steady, and he didn't flinch at the sound. Annalise joined him, babe in arms, her hair long now, streaked with silver in the right light. She rested her head against his shoulder. "Ever think we'd end up here?" she murmured. "No," he said. "But I thank God we did." She kissed his cheek, then the baby's head, then turned toward the horizon. And Elias, who once thought love was a thing best left to others, watched his wife and child in the last light of day and understood something he never had before. What a man saves when he chooses to stay isn't land or pride or legacy. It's them. And sometimes, if he's lucky, they save him right back.